The time is just gone 9:44 a.m. We continue with news and views this morning. Now, this is quite an interesting story. We're talking about a company called Mara Phones. Now, this company had a 100 million rand tax break. And this was South Africa's first smartphone factory. But now we are led to believe it's gone under despite this 100 million rand tax break. And to fill us in and to unpack some of the issues, we join on the line by Vermulan, my Broadband senior journalist. Jan, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, now we've learned about Marathon's 2019 fanfare when this company or this factory was actually launched. And in a short space of time, within a matter of 2 years, 100 million rand tax break later, this company has gone under.
Yes, and 1.5 billion rands worth of investment that was pledged for the company. Apparently, they only received around half of that funding, but still, you're talking about hundreds of millions of rands poured into this company that ultimately amounted to nothing. So yes, the factory is up for sale. The auctioneers are taking offers until the end of February. And it sounds like they're selling it for parts. You don't have to buy the whole factory. You can buy, this cooling unit. You can buy the space and the equipment and the devices, the completed phones that haven't been sold that are in a warehouse. You can buy all of that separately.
Well, now just looking at obviously amount of phones, they had their own cash injection, as you mentioned, 1.5 billion rands. But also at the same time, we've had the IDC, for instance, where they've funded them. They've received trade finance, they've received working capital from the likes of the IDC, and the government took great pride because we obviously thought that this would be one of the projects that South Africa could be proud of as well. But in trying to understand, apart from the cash or the lack of cash injection, what else could have gone wrong, Jan?
The bottom line is that nobody was buying the phones. So, if you're going to pour 1.5 billion rand into an investment, then you need to make sure the business case is sound. And it just didn't look like Mara really had a decent go-to-market strategy. You're up against Samsung in South Africa, in the rest of the continent, because the whole point was we would be manufacturing phones here in South Africa and then export it into our neighboring Southern African countries. And there'll be different competitive forces there. But if you're not going to offer a device that South Africans will look at and go, I will choose this over Samsung, you're dead. You're dead before you've even started. And it didn't look like there was really any kind of strategy in that regard. Mara was depending on government contracts to come through to generate cash flow for the business. And then, of course, the lockdown happened and they had to cut manufacturing and so on. And then they said that there was no such lockdown in Rwanda. And so they could continue operations in Rwanda. But, lockdown aside, if no one is buying your phone, then it doesn't matter whether your factory is on lockdown or not. You need to be able to sell devices if you're going to stay in the game. And so the government contracts, the South African government contracts that Mara had worked into its business case didn't come through in time. And so they went under. And that's truly a failure of a business model. If you're going to be reliant on government the whole time, that's essentially the taxpayer that's going to be keeping this company afloat the whole time, right through. If it's government that invests in it and government contracts that keeps it afloat, that means that this is effectively just another SOE. It's just another taxpayer-funded business. It needs to be like a business like this needs to be self-sustainable, and that was just not thought about at all, apparently, before the business was launched. They didn't think about how do I compete against Samsung. And there's while there's some extenuating circumstances, the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, and the fact that the government contracts didn't come through, one can also argue that half of their work was done for them in South Africa by the United States government, which had suppressed Huawei, which was the other big contender in the middle range of phones. So Mara, their big push in South Africa was going to be in the 4,000 Rand to 6,000 Rand range. And that the big contenders there were Samsung and Huawei. And the American government kept Huawei suppressed by blocking Huawei from accessing American chips from American software. And so, for example, your new Huawei phones don't have access to direct integration, I should say, to things like Google Maps and YouTube and other Google mobile services as a result of these sanctions effectively against Huawei. And so all of a sudden, your number of competitors in the space is halved, and you still can't make a go of it. If Mara couldn't make a go of it then honestly, I don't know what they were doing.
Yes, and also when one looks at business risks and when one measures business risk, one of the greatest risks is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And when one looks at Mara and they depended on the government, when we're talking about a customer base, and the government here would have been a customer where the government had promised and said they would give preference, to buying these phones right until 2026, and that never happened as well. So again, that risk factor, Mara obviously was hoping, but with the government not doing what it had promised as well. And this has obviously created the problem. Like you're saying, nobody's buying these phones.
Right. And the thing about government contracts is I have some experience here because before I was a journalist, I worked for a technology company that also participated in government tenders and relied on government tenders to do business. And if you're gonna, like anybody who enters the space, like if you know anything about anything, you know that you need to have 4 years of runway at least if you're going to make that work. So in other words, if Mara failed in 2021, that's only 2 years, right? So from 2019 to 2021, you're going to need at least another 2-3 years of runway if you're going to be depending on government money, because even after the government contract comes through, you have to execute the contract, then you have to invoice, and then you have to wait for your payment before any cash starts coming into the business. And if they failed within 2 years, this thing was never going to work. And that's disappointing because it demonstrates that there was just no due diligence and no due regard for an actual workable business model. This was just, yes, it looks like a shiny high-tech project that's a jewel in the crown of a desperate government, and it failed.
Well, we certainly will watch this space. Let's see what transpires at the auction. Let's see who buys the factory. But Jan, this morning, we thank you for joining us on News and Views. All the best to you, and please take care.
And you too. Thank you. Have a good day.
Jan Vermulan, my Broadband senior journalist this morning. And again, what can we say? The South African government looking at this, another shiny flagship project, and that has gone past 100 million Rand tax break later. The time is just gone 9:53. We come back. We will be joined by Samira Mohammed.